Today we're going to talk about the Greek world. Today we're going to talk about the Greek world. And when we talk about the Greek world, I want you, because the College Board wants us to, and it's because of the way you should think about world history, we want to think about maybe the Persian Empire that we talked about a couple days ago. The Greek world and the Persian Empire are right next door to each other, and they're absolutely going to come in contact, and sometimes that contact is going to be a little ugly. But the Greek world and the Persian world offer excellent comparisons, right? If the AP is going to ask us a question about similarities and differences, or to compare and contrast two classical empires, maybe the Greek world and the Persian Empire are excellent comparisons to make, because they are so different. There's so many clear differences in how they are set up. So first, with regard to Greece, geographically speaking, we're looking here in the eastern half of the Mediterranean Sea. All right? Greece binds this is a body of water, an offshoot of the Mediterranean Sea called the Aegean Sea. The Aegean Sea, A-E-G-E-A-N, the Aegean Sea. And the Mediterranean Sea. And then there's a bunch of little islands down here in the south as well. This peninsula off the southeastern tip of Europe is called the Peloponnesian Peninsula, or the Peloponnese. That is a big word, and I will spell it for you. P-E-L-O-P. I've lost it. P-E-L-O-P-O-N-N-E-S-E. Wow, that's going to get some kids out if we ever do AP World History Spelling Bee, right? The Peloponnese. So if you ever hear Peloponnese, it's this like southern region of Greece. Or the Peloponnesian Peninsula, it's this. Now, later in world history, or certainly by the time we get to my senior year, we're going to talk about this much larger peninsula encompassing all of southeastern Europe. Anybody know what that's referred to as? Yes, sir? The Balkan Peninsula. The Balkan Peninsula. So Greece is like the southern tip of the Balkan Peninsula. Or we could say the Peloponnesian Peninsula is the southern tip of the Balkan Peninsula. That's just a little geography stuff. Now, what do you notice about this area, even looking from this map, which you can hardly see? Yes, ma'am?
It's purple, but it's right next to the orange.
Okay, it is purple, but that's just the choice of the map maker. What about the actual land, regardless of how we colored it? Yes, ma'am? It's a bunch of islands. We're talking thousands of little tiny islands within the Peloponnese. And then even within mainland Greece, even within the mainland, you've got mountains, tall mountains, and you've got steep valleys, you've got rigid cliffs. This is not a flat, open, plain area like we might see in northern Europe around the Netherlands where it meets the North Sea. This is a rigid and rocky chunk of the world. Yes, ma'am? Okay, very good. So good farming land is going to be a little bit hard to come by. So you're going to do a little foreshadowing. If you were a Greek city-state and you had a growing population, but maybe limited resources because of the land that you're living on, and limited arable land. Arable land is farmable land. Little arable land, what might you do? You would have to trade, or you would maybe try to expand, and we're going to see that from some Greek city-states, some settlement expansion. So excellent, very good thought. Yes, ma'am?
Couldn't you fish too?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Fish is going to be a real big deal. Yes?
There are actually about 2,000 islands, only 600 inhabitants.
Okay, so majority of those islands are just too small and insignificant to have anything going on them, but we're still talking about hundreds of habited islands. Yes? Habited. Inhabited.
Since they didn't really have their main stable crop was grain.
Yeah.
But they didn't have enough arable land for grain.
Yep.
So they started growing olives and grapes.
Grapes.
Olives and grapes.
Yep.
And so they went through the process of manufacturing them into olive oil and wine.
Yep.
And then they traded that.
That became a huge trade commodity.
And then they traded that to Sicily or North Africa.
Beautiful.
To get their grain.
Excellent. And we will spend much more time talking about specific trading routes that are going to develop in probably within a week.
But
yes, ma'am.
It was all started because
they lack the staple resources. Yes, yes.
So is there like sailing really good?
Yeah.
Okay.
necessity is the mother of invention, right? Like if you need to do something, if you can't grow grains to sustain yourself, you figure something else out that you can do and then you trade for it. If you are living on an island, or if you're surrounded by water and trade and contact with other parts of the world is crucial, you're probably going to become pretty good merchants and pretty good sailors. Absolutely. So Greece, as opposed to like maybe this Persian Empire, this big orange hunk that we see over here, going to grow very differently, right? Greece, because of its geography, and certainly aided by the polytheistic faith, they're going to lack unity and lack any kind of political unity that we see in other major classical empires. And in fact, we can't really call at this time Greece an empire. That's why we called it the Greek world rather than the Greek Empire. Because there is no one central state, or there's no one central entity that controls this entire Greek world. Rather, we're looking at hundreds of small, what we call city-states. Small political entities with a central urban area. Now, please don't start thinking about our 21st century cities, where we have hundreds of thousands or even millions of people living in them. These are all very small by today's standards. We're talking most city-states fell in the range of about 500 citizens to about 5,000. So these are very small entities. Very small entities means very small militaries, means you can't have a whole lot of expansion of the empire. You can't have expansion of the states. Whereas Persia, it's going to create a powerful centralized state, a strongly organized centralized state, where all of those subjects of that empire are going to have to pay their taxes, and that's going to go to one central organization, the government, right, the Central Persian Empire. And then that Persian Empire will grow a massive military that they can further expand and bring more people into the fold and collect more taxes from them and grow a military even further, right? We don't see that in Greece. We don't see that in Greece, at least at first.
So like no expansion,
no expansion of an empire. The expansion that we're going to see is going to look a little bit different in Greece, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I want to just give you a couple names of city-states that rise to be the more powerful ones, the more well-known ones. I'm going to give you three, as we could, if you want to become an expert in this, you could learn hundreds of them. But we're talking about Athens. We're talking about Sparta. And I'm going to throw Thebes in there, because you guys remember Thebes from the Oedipus story. That's where he was heading to originally. That's where he would become the king of. Thebes, Thebes, Thebes. But Athens and Sparta are the big ones. And Athens and Sparta in their own right, just like we can compare the Greek world to the Persian world, you can compare life in Athens and life in Sparta, because they're going to be very distinct and very different. So, most of these city-states, here's Sparta down in the southern Peloponnese, here's Athens. Most of these city-states were fiercely independent. You know, their neighbors aren't far geographically from them, but they're far in terms of ease of access. You know, these mountains and these valleys and these islands that they exist on. To communicate. We also want to take a step back too and remember that their world and the communication of their world is very different from ours. How does one communicate between Athens and Sparta? You literally have to go there. Somebody has to go and give a letter or spread a message verbally, right? Today, we can communicate on opposite corners of the globe in an instant. That's certainly not the case two millennia ago. The Greek world, as we're discussing it today, is going to be born around the year 750, but this is very much a roundabout time to pick, where we start to see the real establishment of the Greek civilization in the Greek world.
750 CE.
Around 750 BCE, before the Common Era. And it's going to flourish for about 300 years. Yeah, that's pretty good. About 750 to 450, 300 maybe. There will be some expansion of this Greek world, but as I've already mentioned, that expansion is not going to come in the conquest of neighbors through massive militaries. It's going to come through individual farmers who say, oh man, I don't have enough farmland here. I'm going to venture out as a settler, much like we have settlers in American history that are going to make their way out west to find more farmland that they could, maybe poor Easterners going out west because they have the opportunity to gain more land. So we will have Greek settlers who are going to go throughout the Mediterranean, maybe into Sicily, southern Italy, maybe on the opposite coast of the Aegean Sea. See how we have some purple kind of up in here? All the way around, this is the Bosporus Sea. We'll talk about that. Maybe even into the Black Sea region. You've just got Greek settlers who are packing up their bags and packing up their families and setting up shop somewhere else, all right? With the idea that they can have a better life because maybe there's more land there that they can farm. Yes, sir?
Would merchants do that as well?
Yeah, but merchants usually don't set up camp. Merchants usually just take their stuff from point A to point B, sell it, and then go back to point A to get more stuff to sell. So merchants usually don't set up shop, or they don't become settlers. Merchants are often travelers. They're going back and forth. They're vagabond. They have no home. They have no permanent existence because they're constantly moving from point A to point B to travel and trade. The farmers become the settlers. They establish new eventual cities. Yes?
And were merchants counted as one of the top classes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll talk that again. We're going to deal with that on a later day when we talk about trade in particular.
How are they able to get, let's say, north of the Black Sea? Is it
Up in here?
No, I'm saying north of the Black Sea. Why didn't Persia just keep going overseas?
Well, yeah. Why isn't Persia up in here? Persia just kind of didn't expand up into there. If you spill a glass of milk on the floor, that is only going to that spill is only going to spread so far until there's not enough milk to push further. And eventually, empires find their point where there's just not enough milk to push the empire further. And in some cases, that's the case. You've got to be able to feed massive armies if you're going to continue to expand. So eventually, for every empire, there is a stopping point. There's a point where the empire is stretched so thin that now when they come in contact with new people in different areas, those people might be able to keep the empire at bay because it's so far. Remember, if you're Persia, we don't even see it on the map. Where's the heart of the Persian Empire? Way down here in the city of Persepolis, north of the Persian Gulf. That's far. And that's far today, but that's really far 2,500 years ago. All right? So the Greek world will experience some expansion, but primarily due to settlements of farmers. The most important aspect to the Greek world, the reason why world history courses in the United States, for example, used to really start with Greece rather than dealing with all this India and China stuff, is because of the idea of Greek political participation. The Greeks are absolutely unique in the way they organized their governments. Now that said, we said there's hundreds of these city-states, right? There is no uniform way that these city-states will be ruled. Some city-states are going to be ruled as monarchies. Some city-states are going to be ruled at times by individuals known as tyrants. Now, we hear the word tyrant today, and we think that is like a terrible thing, right? That this is a, you have to be brutal if you are a tyrant. In the Greek world, a tyrant wasn't necessarily a brutal dictator over its people. A tyrant was oftentimes an individual who had the support of the poorer classes in the Greek world and would use that support of the masses, the majority of people are poorer, use that support to wrestle control from an aristocracy. There's another Greek word, right? Aristocracy. The aristocracy, aristos means the best, or the wealthy. And kratik is rule. So an aristocracy is a rule by the wealthy. Typically, when we see most governments over human history forming, the aristocracy is where the power is, all right? The kings or the emperors are in most cases, rising out of the aristocracy. But sometimes in some Greek city-states, you would have this tyrant king, this tyrant that would take control, who would have such support from the poorer classes that he might be able to take some authority from this aristocracy. But what we remember in the Western world, what we think about Greece more than anything else with regard to political participation, is the idea of, in the Greek world, we start to see what are called citizens. Citizens rather than subjects. A citizen rather than a subject. You guys are citizens of the United States. You are not subjects of the president or subjects of the state. A subject is someone who is ruled. Yes, sir?
That's an interesting point because in America, in our passport, we have the citizen of the United States.
Yep.
However, in some of my teachers that are British, and their passport, it says subject of the royal.
Interesting, yeah. And Britain is just holding on to that last thread of the monarchy in England. And obviously, despite the fact that they are subjects of the king, it's symbolic today. But you absolutely have other kingdoms today, like in Saudi Arabia, for example, where it is not symbolic and it's absolutely the rule of the land. So the idea of citizenry versus being a subject, we're going to hit this really hard later in the year when we talk about the French Revolution, because that's, for the modern world, that's where this idea really changes. For most of human history, regular people, like all of us would be, regular people were subjects of a ruler. They were underneath the ruler. They would have no say in how that ruler would rule, or the laws that he would pass down, or the whims that he might have on a given day. Citizens, on the other hand, have some say. Citizens can work to make the laws. Citizens can work to change the laws. Citizens can work to change the ruler. And in the Greek world, we see an idea of citizenship rather than just being a mere subject of an emperor. And this is a first, really, in world history. This is what makes Greece so unique. This is why, despite the fact that there is no major landmass that they're occupying as an empire, it's crucial that we talk about them. And this is really centered on Athens, and what we would call Athenian democracy, where in Athens, male citizens, still a patriarchal society, but it's better than what it would be if nobody got a voice. Male citizens could vote on matters of public policy. Also, we're going to see in Athens, any citizen, okay, again, it's going to be the guys, but any citizen could hold public office, regardless of their aristocratic status. And in fact, many public offices would be drawn by lot, which means, you get picked, you got picked, you got picked. It was random. But so you might be from a wealthy family, but it wouldn't be she, I'm sorry. Man, I am so modern. It's hard to think in a patriarchal mindset. He over there might be from a poorer household, but he could still be an important public official. All citizens in Athenian democracy could participate in what's called the assembly, where the citizens of Athens could get together and directly decide the rules or the laws of the state. This is what's known as a direct democracy, where every citizen has the opportunity to vote on matters of public policy. Yes, ma'am. Oh, no, 1 second. Yeah, Hannah. I don't even need to say male citizens, because women aren't citizens. They're there, they get to live within the Greek world, but they're not considered citizens. The citizens are those that have the rights of the city. That's the word citizen in city. And women wouldn't be included. Foreigners wouldn't be included. And a lot of these cities, especially Athens, was very cosmopolitan. When we use that word cosmopolitan, they've got people from all over the world that are in Athens. It's a center of education. It's a center of trade. A lot of different kinds of people go in there. But if you're a foreigner, you don't have citizen rights. All right? Slaves, of course. There's going to be slaves in the Greek world. Slaves don't have the rights of citizens. So a majority of like the human beings living in the Greek world, living in Athens, don't get to make these decisions. But the male, natural-born population does. And that's big for its time. Yeah, Alex?
You were saying you can participate in what?
In choosing matters of public policy. So the assembly convenes, there's an issue, it's discussed, it's debated, and then all of the male citizens, redundant, all of the citizens get to vote. All right? That's what's called direct democracy. That's very different from our democracy today, which we call a... This was a republic too. Republic is just a fancy word that means you don't have a king ruling you. We are a representative democracy. We are a representative democracy. We choose representatives because I ain't got time to go talk about every single issue that comes up. So we choose representatives to make those decisions for us. We elect representatives and senators, and they make our laws for us. Why does a representative democracy work so much better in the modern times, but the Athenians were able to get away with a direct democracy? Yes, sir?
There's more people now.
We have way too many people. More people means more issues. You know, in Athens, it was relatively small. Fewer people, fewer issues. It was easier to have direct votes on these things. Yes, sir?
Are we a proportional representation because we have different states?
Yes and no. This is one of the it's known as the Great Compromise, right, guys? You guys learned this last year in APUSH. We had this amazing deal worked out at the Constitutional Convention where our House of Representatives, the lower body of our Congress, would be elected based on proportional terms. So based on population. So those states that have more citizens would have more members of the House of Representatives. But then on the flip side, the upper house, our Senate, is, regardless of state population, 2 senators per state. So it offers some balance. And you had to have that compromise in our founding because the heavily populated states would have never gone with a constitution that didn't give them at least some extra weight compared to the small states. Yes, ma'am?
I was saying that the people, they're all living in the same exact place, so they're all like mostly the same climate stuff, and they're all the same people, like
Yeah.
all the same ethnicity mostly, but not really.
Are you, wait a minute. Are you, okay, so what was said here is, if you didn't hear, was that like the people living in Athens are all pretty much the same. As opposed to maybe if we looked at Persia or we looked at an expanding Han dynasty in China. What you're doing right now is you are making note of a stark difference that we're going to see between like a Greek world and the massive multi-ethnic empires that we will see in Persia or in China or eventually in the Roman Empire. Excellent. And why might that lead to a different evolution of a state? What's a challenge then that Greece doesn't have to deal with that maybe Persia will?
I don't know, I guess they don't have the same viewpoints and stuff.
Okay, you might have a more common viewpoint. Yes, ma'am?
There's like religion.
Okay, a common religion. There's a common language already built in. Yeah?
Just like they're kind of accommodate for everybody.
Yeah, it's you don't have to bend to minority groups quite as much as you would have to if you're creating a massive multi-ethnic empire. You might have fewer rifts popping up from people who don't want to be ruled by someone that's very different from them. Excellent. Can you think of a fancy word that we would use maybe on an AP essay rather than everybody's kind of the same? Is there one word that encapsulates that idea? A homogeneous society. Very good. A homogeneous society. And Athens would have been a more homogeneous society. That said, I did mention that Athens was very cosmopolitan. And you would have a lot of travelers and traders from different parts of the world checking out Athens. So at any given time, Athens is going to look like kind of like New York City. A lot of different kinds of people going to Athens. But when it comes to citizenship and who has rights within the empire, those are going to be the Athenians only. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Remember, though, that this level of citizenship is going to vary by city-state. Some places will be ruled by kings, as I mentioned. Some, like Sparta, will be ruled by councils of elders. But there will also be a monarchy within Sparta, obviously advised and subservient in some cases to this council of elders. So just because it's the Greek world does not mean everybody's practicing direct democracy. But because especially one part of the Greek world practiced direct democracy, that makes it crucial for us to understand and remember that. All right. We can see that we've got Greece. And just to its east, we've got this massive Persian Empire. And we start to see a smattering of Greeks who are taking up hold right on the fringes of the Persian Empire. These are those settlers who are just looking for a little bit more land. And over many decades and even centuries, they have settled in various parts around the Black Sea and around the Aegean Sea on this peninsula here is known as Anatolia, the Anatolian Peninsula. It's today's Turkey, all right? The Greeks called this Ionia, and there were many Greek settlers there. And as the Persian Empire grew in strength, the Persian Empire started to assert its authority over those Greek settlements. But as we just mentioned, the Greeks aren't much to having authority pressed onto them from a central power. These are Greeks whose political heritage is typically one of independence. I get to do my own thing. I get to have a say in how I'm going to be governed. The Persians, on the other hand, have an absolute central authority, okay? Now, they would let many times, let local peoples kind of practice their same faith, but your tax dollars were going to the Persian Empire. And the Persian Empire, at times, would call up and force conscripts into their military. Well, these Greek citizens didn't want to play this game. And so there would be small uprisings and revolts. Well, what does an empire do when a small corner of its empire is starting to rise up and revolt? They're going to crush it. And as the Persian Empire moves to crush some of these revolts, Athens, at first, is going to step up to support them. Because in many cases, those are former Athenians that are living there. And now the Persian Empire has got an upstart Greek world that's causing it fits. Far out on its fringes, far out on its frontier. So if you're the Persian Empire, you can't let this be. Because what would happen to the Persian Empire if the rest of the empire got wind that all you have to do is rise up and protest and riot a little bit, and the Persian Empire will just let you go? It'll be the end of the empire. An empire can't survive. If you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk. If you let the Greeks have their way, all of the other people of your empire are going to want to have their way as well. So if you are the emperor of the Persians, what must you do when these Greeks start rising up against you? You must put them down. And we will have a couple wars that are known as the Persian Wars, or the Greco-Persian Wars, break out in the early 5th century BCE. 5th century BCE, give me a year that takes place in that. Mora, give me a year in the 5th century BCE. Did I hear 490? Yes, that is a year in the 5th century BCE. All right. Remember, we're going backwards now from before the Common Era. So in 490 BCE, the Greek king Darius is going to launch a military expedition against the Greeks. Did I say Greek king? I meant Persian king. The Persian king Darius is going to launch an expedition against the Greeks. So who started the Persian War? You've got Greeks rising up. You've got the Athenians supporting them. You've got the Persians coming in to smack that down.
So who's the Persian king?
Darius the First. D-A-R-I-U-S, or Darius.
So, like, was he
Yeah, he's ruling as a god king to the Persian Empire. Absolutely.
So he starts the war. He sparks it.
Well, you could say the war was started when the Greeks of Ionia were rising up against Persian rule.
Did they have like a declaration of?
No, there's nothing that organized at the outset.
He fought which city state? Which
Well, okay, so here we go. Here's the issue with Greece, is there's no unification early on. But as this Persian War breaks out, guess what? All of those little Greek city-states who were very different and very unique from each other, despite sharing a similar language, the same language, despite sharing the same religion, they were independent city-states. Athens couldn't tell Sparta what to do, Sparta couldn't tell Athens what to do. But now you've got the Persian army. You've got the Persian Empire looking to move in and possibly conquer the Greek world. And if you are Sparta, or if you are Athens, you are going to be very willing to give up your differences, to put aside your differences with your neighboring Greeks, even if you were an enemy of them, or rival to them. You're going to put aside your differences, because if these guys win, your existence is going to be dramatically altered. So what we're going to see for the first time in the history of the Greek world is an organization of Greek city-states that's known as the Delian League. The Delian League, D-E-L-I-A-N. Essentially, disparate Greek city-states, different Greek city-states will join together in a military organization in order to fight these Persians. Because even though Athens and Sparta are different from each other and they don't always like each other, neither of them wants to see a Persian victory. And in an against all odds war between the Greeks and the Persians, the Greeks, pequeño, the Persians, grande. Pequeño? Grande. The Greeks win. 10 years later, another war is going to be launched by the Persians to put these Greeks in their place. And the Greeks win again. Now, there's a lot of historians that write about these wars, these early wars. In fact, one of the earliest historians, a Greek guy named Herodotus, started writing a history of these Persian wars. And that's where we get a lot of this story from. It's coming from a Greek perspective. But later historians have asked questions of, why did the Greeks win? How could the outmanned and ultimately outgunned Greeks win? Yes, ma'am?
So they have one possible position. They had to do a different strategy.
Okay, there's going to be some different strategies and organization that they're going to use. Yes, ma'am?
So their geography?
Their geography makes it challenging. Right? The geography makes it challenging. You guys might have heard of the story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. We're not going to get into the battle, but the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, they're able to hold back the Persian army for a decent amount of time, not necessarily because they're just great fighters, because they were pretty impressive fighters, but because they're 300 guys at Thermopylae Pass. Thermopylae Pass was a very narrow strip of land that the Persians had to get themselves through. Remember the geography, cliffs and valleys. So very narrow pass that the Persians had to get themselves through. So 300 guys could effectively hold back massive armies because the Persians couldn't send their entire army through the pass at one time. All right. Many historians right now are writing about how the Greek world was made up of free fighters. Guys that chose to be in a war, chose to fight, and had to win, or else their way of life would have come to a crashing halt. Whereas the Persian army was made up of conscripts. You know, Persian subjects of the Persian Empire were forced into this fight. Who's got more to fight for? Who's got more to win for? The Persians moving into the Greek world, or the Greeks trying to hold on to their own? Probably the Greeks. And the Greeks do win. One other... Just don't even write it down, just hear it so you can go, oh yeah, that's what that is. One of the earliest battles in this first Persian War in 490 was called the Battle of Marathon. And now you guys have heard of the run, a marathon. That gets its name from this dude named Phidippides. Don't write his name down because I don't even know how to tell you how to spell it. Phidippides, who, when the Persians were coming, kind of like Paul Revere of the Greek world, had to run back and tell everybody, the Persians are coming, the Persians are coming. And he had to run like 26.2 miles. Or the Greek equivalent, whatever they would have called that back in the time. And that's why when crazy people decide to run for no good reason whatsoever, even though nothing is chasing them, they run 26.2 miles in a marathon. And so this has kind of lived on since that day. All right, very good. Everybody good? After the Persian Wars, the Greeks win, of course. The Greeks win the Persian Wars. But we remember that they formed this Delian League in order to win. And with the formation of this Delian League, you can imagine the more powerful and wealthy city-states are going to assert more authority in that Delian League. So Athens, within the Delian League, is going to be dominant. And after the Persian Wars, Athens starts strutting its stuff, like we are the best of all of the Greek city-states. And Athens continues to attempt to assert authority over other city-states. But this is a Greek world that has long been fiercely independent. So one city-state in particular is going to rise as a rival of Athens. And it's going to say, no, Athens, you're not going to dominate us, and that is Sparta. And in 431, we're going to have another war break out, this time a civil war within the Greek world between Athens and their friends and Sparta and their friends. And this is called the Peloponnesian War, because it takes place on the Peloponnese, right? The Peloponnesian War. And this Peloponnesian War lasts from 431 to 404 BCE. Now, keep in mind, that's a 27-year period. Historic wars, wars in antiquity, aren't non-stop wars. People are coming, people are going back to tend their fields, you know, armies are moving and shifting. There's not battle every day. It's not like modern warfare that we might see when we start to study World War I or the Second World War. Athens and their allies and Sparta and their allies. Sparta wanting to put Athens in its place. You're not going to control me. And in the end, Sparta wins. Go Michigan State.
Wait, what was the years that happened?
431 to 404, but do not remember those years. You don't need to memorize those years. Just know it's after the Persian Wars. Athens is defeated by Sparta, but in the end, all of the Greek world loses. Because wars are costly, wars are deadly, wars can break civilizations. And this civil war is going to dramatically weaken all of the Greek city-states that took part. One Greek city-state, though, that does not take part is on a frontier region in the north. Look at all these pictures I forgot to show you. Hey, there's an assembly. There's a Greek assembly, maybe in Athens. Look at all those guys making decisions. Here is the Persian Wars. You can see the Persian Empire moving in, fighting the Greeks. This is a painting of a guy named Pericles, and we're going to look at his funeral oration. Pericles is an Athenian statesman who is trying to rally his troops to continue to fight the Spartans, to convince the Spartans that their society, or to convince the Athenians that their society is the better of all the Greek world. But in the end, the Peloponnesian War weakens all the Greeks, and it's going to leave this guy the ability to rise up and conquer them all. What's that? Oh, Macedon. Macedonia. It's to the north.
That's unusual.
Yeah, I don't have a good map of it here. So Macedonia is up to the north of the Peloponnese.
And then they took over.
I did have it? Okay, well, we'll leave it be for now. So Macedon kind of stays out of this Peloponnesian War. But they will feast now on the weakness of those Greek city-states to their south. Led first by Philip II, and then later his son Alexander. Now, Macedon is independent, but they're still like of the Greek culture. They still speak the same language. They still worship the same gods. So Alexander, later to be known as Alexander the Great, will continue his father's conquests. From 333 to 323, a 10-year period, Alexander the Great will lead his Macedonian armies on a reign of conquest greater than any other individual in human history up till when we talk about a guy named Genghis Khan. Alexander the Great, in 10 years, will create the largest empire the world has ever seen to that point. And it will remain the largest empire that the world has ever seen. Challenged by the Romans eventually, certainly not by one individual, but until we see Genghis Khan. Stretching from the Greek world, here we see Macedonia in the north, stretching from the Greek world into North Africa, Egypt, and all the way across the old Persian Empire into northern India. Yes, ma'am?
So, when Greece won the Persian War,
Yep.
did Persia, like...
Good question. When Greece wins the Persian Wars, does Persia, like, fall? No. Remember how that war started. That was like Persia moving in to try to calm down the Greeks, right? The Greeks don't have any kind of ability to then continue, at this point, during the Persian Wars, to continue marching into Persia and eventually conquer the Persian capital. No. They are just trying to keep the Persians back from their settlements. And they win. They do get that. They keep the Persians out of the Peloponnese. They do that. Theirs is not going to turn into a war of conquest because they simply can't. Their numbers are far too small. So for the Persians, the Persia, like, they didn't really care. This was a fringe border war. This was a minor conflict on their border. Hugely important for the Greeks. Relatively minor for the Persians. Not a big deal. A blip on their radar. A fly they shoo away. Yes, ma'am?
So, when Alexander the Great takes over this large portion of land, he has to conquer Persia?
He then is going to be the guy that conquers Persia. So Alexander the Great, yes, sir?
Did he conquer the Greek cities, states as well?
Yeah, his father did a lot of that. His father, Philip II, before him, did a lot of the conquering of the Greek city-states because they were so weak from fighting the Peloponnesian War. Alexander will continue to push into the Anatolian Peninsula, into Egypt, northeast Africa, and then across into Persia and India. He will create one of the biggest empires that humankind has ever seen, and he does it within 10 years. Alexander is seen as one of the greatest military leaders in human history. When he dies, in his life, one thing that's going to help him consolidate an empire, especially in this Persian Empire, remember Persia was a massive multi-ethnic empire. As Alexander comes waltzing in, a lot of peoples that were dominated by the Persians will think, hey, if we join with you, we get to beat up the Persians who have been dominating us for centuries? Okay, we'll help you out. So Alexander's going to get a lot of help from the people that were formerly dominated by the Persians. But then Alexander himself, along with his top generals, as he is making his way through Persia, he's going to take a Persian wife. He's going to marry a Persian woman, blending those cultures. So this is not going to be seen as Alexander, a Greek guy, dominating the Persian world. It's going to see as a molding, a melding of the Persian world with the Greek world, making it kind of one. Alexander dies, and he's going to divide his empire amongst three of his top generals. But from now on, there is no independent Greek city-states that we're dealing with. Now we have a Greek empire and a Greek world. And throughout this whole Greek world, guess what Alexander's going to spread? The Greek language, the Greek culture, Greek religion, Greek architecture. So we will see smatterings of the Greek world all the way into what is today Afghanistan. Unfortunately, a lot of that has been destroyed in the last decade or two by a Taliban government and warring in Afghanistan. And this is what is known as the Hellenistic period of history. Very good. The Greeks didn't call themselves Greeks because they didn't speak the same language that we do. They called themselves the Hellenes. So this ushers in the Hellenistic period of history. When Alexander spreads the culture of the Greeks, it's the Hellenistic period. If you guys go to college and you join a fraternity or sorority, you know they go by Greek letters, right, their names. And the collective Greek organization on whatever university you go to is called the Pan-Hellenic organization. All of the Greek societies kind of together today. So this is the Hellenistic period of history, the spread of Greek culture. Yes?
Empire that he created?
The Hellenistic Empire. I don't know that he would have called it the Remember, this is all happening within 10 years. This is like a blip on the radar of human history. This is happening very fast. And it's not going to be a long-lasting empire, because once he dies, he divides his empire, he divides his holding, or as he's dying, he divides it amongst 3 generals. And those 3 generals will now rule their own empires based on their names. A guy named Ptolemy, a guy named Seleucus, and a guy named Antigone. So it's going to be eventually divided up and just named after the generals.
Would this go like with the Persian Empire completely vanished by now?
The Persian Empire is going to be pretty much overrun, but guess the general, a guy named Seleucus, who's going to take over what was once Persia, guess what? It's going to be the Seleucid Persian Empire. It's going to be still technically a Persian empire with mostly Persian people, but ruled by this Greek guy. Just like in Egypt. It's still going to be mostly Egyptian people, just now ruled by Greeks, right? You've heard of Cleopatra, a great Egyptian queen, right? Cleopatra was in this Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt. Ptolemy was one of the generals of Alexander. So now it's all connected to the Greek world. Good? Good. Excellent. Rome. Holy moly. We're going to do Rome in 5 minutes. Rome, originally a kingdom back in the day. We're not talking about that. In 509, the Roman kingdom is overthrown essentially by a group of aristocrats who established what's known as the Roman Republic. Republic means no king, right? So they established the Roman Republic in 509 BCE. That is largely led by the wealthy. In Rome, we're going to call the wealthy, not wealthy or aristocrats, we're going to call them patricians in Rome. Patricians. Led by the wealthy patricians, but advised by a senate representing many people. So there's kind of some flavorings of some kind of representative democratic rule, even though people don't get to necessarily vote for the Senate at this time. There will be some conflict over the years with the poorer classes in Rome, and those people are called the plebeians or the plebs. And obviously they make up a majority of the society. And over time, the plebs, as the majority of the society, will start to have some more rights within that society. A law code called the 12 Tables will start to create some equality before the law within the Roman world. Through the 5th century into the 4th and the 3rd and the 2nd century BCE, the Roman Republic will begin to expand. Here's Rome, initially through the Italian peninsula into Sicily, but eventually hopping into northern Spain and even across the Mediterranean Sea. In the 2nd century BCE, the Roman Republic will fight a series of wars with a city-state called Carthage. You don't need to write this, you don't need to know this for the AP exam, but there's a famous Carthaginian general. Yes, ma'am?
When did the Roman Republic start expanding?
Upon its birth, but did much of its expansion in the 4th and 3rd and 2nd centuries. A Carthaginian general that you guys might have heard of is a guy named Hannibal. Yeah. Another one of those guys that's seen as one of the greatest generals of all time. Hannibal would lead an invasion of Italy by going through Spain. He's got his elephants, his war elephants he's taking with him, through the mountains of the Pyrenees, down through the Alps, taking all those African elephants through the Alps, losing most of them on the way, making his way down into Italy, where he's ultimately going to be defeated, and the Roman Empire wins, and the Roman Empire destroys Carthage and salts the earth, so the Carthaginians can never rise again. But the Roman Empire, or Roman Republic, pardon me, will expand. Eventually the Roman Republic begins to take in all of these orange lands, and they grow far larger. And as they grow larger, they bring in more wealth. And as they bring in more wealth, the army grows more powerful. And as the army grows more powerful, we see the rise of powerful generals, like a guy like Julius Caesar. And eventually Julius Caesar turns his army on the government of the Roman Republic. And a civil war breaks out. Caesar is ultimately murdered, right? William Shakespeare told us about this. But out of this chaos in Rome, out of this civil war in the Roman Republic, will rise one ruler of all of Rome. And that name is Augustus Caesar, or his name is Octavian, actually. He's Julius Caesar's nephew. His name is Octavian, but he will take the name Augustus Caesar. And what were we going to say back here? He is an adopted son, but he's actually he is a part of the family. So he takes the name Augustus Caesar, and he becomes the Roman Empire's first emperor. The empire will continue to grow through the next 4 centuries to become one of the largest empires in human history, completely surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. In fact, the Romans didn't call the Mediterranean Sea, they called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. It was theirs. They controlled it. And pushing over into what is today France, even pushing into the southern portion of what is today England, like the southern half of the main British Isle, I guess. Eventually, let me just finish up and I'm going to let you guys go to lunch. Eventually, we can see a problem forming, just like the Persians might have. As this empire grows and grows and grows, you've got some trouble holding on to the whole thing. You've got some trouble maintaining your borders. So in the late 3rd century BCE, or of the Common Era, 3rd century CE, a Roman emperor named Diocletian, D-I-O-C-L-E-T-I-A-N, a Roman emperor named Diocletian will set up a new capital in a city called Byzantium. We're going to talk much more about this going forward. He sets up a second capital. So then the Roman Empire can essentially be divided between East and West. I guess I didn't put another one on there. There it is. Should be there. It's not coming up. The Roman Empire can now be divided between an Eastern Roman Empire, and a Western Roman Empire. A later emperor, this is now in the early 4th century BCE, named Constantine. He's also the guy that converted to Christianity, so he helped Christianity spread in the Roman Empire. Constantine is going to say, hey, we have 2 capitals, but I'm moving to Constantinople. This is the big one now. And Rome will cease to be the center of the Roman Empire. Constantinople will make sense because this is where the money is in this part of the world. Far more than this part of the world. We will talk next week about the eventual, or maybe next class, about the eventual fall of these empires, including the Roman Empire, but now we've seen how they've expanded. I'm sorry I went over. Go to lunch, and today, feel free to walk slow coming back. Did you?
Sorry.